I don't see myself as a low-tech or a high-tech, you know, I just see myself as an aquascaper who's passionate about creating beautiful aquariums, but passionate about caring for what's in those aquariums. Just going to feed the fish. Hopefully you'll get a better shot of the angels. They're absolutely beautiful. Do a full deep dive on this tank soon. In fact, Ty Streetman's coming any minute, well, in the next hour or so, to do a video himself, so it'll be interesting to get his take on this tank. So make sure you subscribe to Ty Streetman as well. So this video is largely about low-tech and high-tech planted tanks and my kind of understanding of what that means, and how hopefully maybe you watching can use some of the knowledge and experience to your benefit. I think it's important to note before we start, we don't live in a divisive world, we live in a world full of media which tries to make us divisive, and this kind of low-tech versus high-tech thing, it's like tribal, you know, you're either a low-tech guy or a high-tech guy or girl. And it isn't the case. I think it's important to look at what we have in common rather than what separates us. And I'd like to think that anyone that keeps a planted aquarium is doing it because, well, doing it for their own purpose. It's none of my business why they do it. What is my business is how I do it, and I guess that's why this video is being created, is because I'd like to tell you some stories, I'd like to give you some technical information, some experience, hopefully some beautiful footage of these aquascapes to kind of practically and visually show you the differences, the advantages and disadvantages of each high and low tech, and what does it actually mean. You know, it's a very simplistic way of describing a planted aquarium system, low tech or high tech. It's obviously a lot more nuanced, and it's a bit of a spectrum really. At the kind of lowest tech end, you have no filter, no CO2 injection, no liquid fertilizers, potentially a nutrient-rich substrate because the plants need to get nutrients from somewhere other than fish waste, potentially. Although the fish waste does accumulate in the substrate with the zero water changes, and that allows decomposition, creation of CO2, bacteria and other nutrients to help feed the plants. So you have the lowest kind of end of the spectrum, which is no tech, I guess, apart from the light. You could even use sunlight, ambient light for some plants. Don't even need an artificial light in some cases. And then all the way to the highest tech, you know, something like this potentially, you know, strong LED lighting, pressurized CO2 injection with pH controller potentially, nutrient-rich substrate system, daily liquid fertilizers, big weekly water changes, computerized everything, app controls for everything, smart plugs, you know, the highest tech to kind of automate as much as possible. In fact, I did an aquarium planting session a couple of months back with Daniel. I'll leave a link to that in the description, which is the highest tech aquarium I've ever worked with auto water change, auto reverse osmosis system, so we could literally dial in the TDS of the water that he wanted. Ichihiros, fully controllable lighting, sump filtration, CO2, you know, the list goes on. And it's not to say that one method is better or worse than the other. They're just different methods to suit different needs, different budgets, different lifestyles, different time, spare time you have to maintain. And also, on a deeper level, a different kind of level of how much influence you want over the natural processes of what would happen at baseline. So what I mean by that is at baseline, if you just had a container of water, put some soil in the bottom, put some plants, and then just let it do its thing, that's baseline. You know, it's the sort of minimalist approach that you could get, the most minimalist you could get. You're limited by the plants you can grow, by the colours you can achieve, by the fish and shrimp and other livestock that you could inhabit in that aquarium. But you could argue that that system is most in keeping with nature, and you're kind of going along with nature as nature kind of intended, with minimal kind of input from us, the human. And there are many successful aquarists that do great jobs with this system. You know, it springs to mind my friend James with the 28-year-old low-tech dual Rio 180 aquarium. I did a video with him. I will be doing a podcast with him at some point. Shout out to James, his YouTube channel's growing very well. I'm really pleased to see that. And you have people like Father Fish, and you have other YouTube creators that really, that's their style. They've almost attached their, almost like a sense of identity to that style, and they're very good at it. And they know a lot about that style, and there's some definite advantages to that style. But I think the disadvantages, apart from the limiting plants you can grow and fish and things you can keep in these systems, is that they require so much patience. You know, in order for a dirted tank or Welshstad style or ecology, whatever label you want to call these really low-tech systems, they require a lot of patience on behalf of the aquarist, of the hobbyist. Patience is a great thing, but we live in an age where patience is in kind of short supply with a lot of people, especially beginners, and this is understandable. A beginner will see a beautiful aquarium and they'll want to achieve that. They might potentially have to wait in terms of achieving something like James's beautiful aquarium. They'd have to wait a good 6 months or so for the aquarium to actually fully stabilise and to start to see great plant growth with very little algae issues, and you'd be able to stock more fish, etc. And how many beginners are there out there that would be willing to go through that 6-month period of, you know, algae blooms, crashes, potentially plants melting? In my opinion, not many. And also, in my opinion, if a brand new hobbyist comes in and tries this style and has a bad experience, I say bad in inverted commas, if their plants melt, you know, they potentially spent $100 or so on plants. They've bought an aquarium system, of course, and they have this super bad experience. You could potentially put them off for life, and then we've lost that hobbyist. In my mind, that's a bit of a tragedy, because I think the aquarium hobby and aquascaping in particular is such a beautiful way to live, you know, with a living natural system in your home or your school or your office or whatever the living space. If we've lost someone, you know, then that's really, it makes me a bit sad. I think there's a kind of middle ground. We don't have to go all really super high-tech, super expensive. You know, room for error is relatively small. You know, so like a tightrope, the higher lighting you go, the more risk of algae you get, etc. There is a middle ground. You don't have to use CO2 injection. You know, you don't have to use strong LED lighting to grow many aquarium plants. A good example is the tank here on the left. This is my angelfish stroke ember tetra aquarium that I set up relatively recently with Thai treatment. I'll leave a link to the setup vlog in the description. I'd say it's low tech. You know, the online kind of community definition of low tech simply means no CO2 injection, which is very simplistic, because you could have LED controllable, you know, fully app controlled lighting, inline heater, all in one, external filter like the Biomaster, glassware, you know, fancy low iron rimless glass, you know, high quality cabinet. This is all relatively high tech in terms of the technology, but in terms of the methodology, it's quite low tech. And I say low tech because it has plain sand as a substrate, not even a soil, or there's no underlayer. You know, some people use garden soil or compost. Hardscape, of course, wood, a few tiny pebbles. Oh, I've got a bloody call coming in. Let's bring them back, shall we? I get a lot of spam calls, but I'm curious to see how this goes. You can listen in fact, it'd be interesting.
Do you rent a poorly maintained property? Does your landlord refuse to rectify the issue? By law, you can legally force your landlord to carry out repairs. Okay,
it's a compensation line. I think I'll block that. Simple sand substrate, just wood hardscape, got some twigs and cool stuff in there to give details. There's actually an LED background lighting on there from the light ground, which gives a really beautiful kind of hue, which I think really enhances the overall aesthetic of the scape. And then planting, we've got Amazon frogbit and Halantium quadricostatus, which is probably the easiest and fastest growing carpeting plant that you could ever get in a no CO2 aquarium. I've never experienced anything that's so easy to grow, particularly in my water. I do have hard water. I am going to do another video on testing water, by the way. I've been gratefully sent a pack from NT Labs, so look out for that video forthcoming. Filtration is the Biomaster 350 with built-in heater, which you could argue is high tech. And the aquarium system is an Awase Scapoline 60. The fish are stunning, aren't they? The pair of blue angel fish there. They weren't cheap, but they're actually a bit of an impulsive buy, and I realise they're too small for that aquarium in the long term. And they'll get transported into my Highline 400 when they do eventually outgrow that tank. Plants, other plants is a Ludwigia Rubin, I think, Rubin, I can't remember the full name, I'll put a subtitle down. Glassware, I've actually reduced the regular 16mm inlet and outlet hose size down to 12mm with a hose adapter, much more discreet. Actually reduces the flow a little bit as well, which is actually quite useful because arguably there's a little bit too much flow without doing that. The methodology on the tank on the left is low tech, no CO2, no substrate fertilisation, but I am adding quite a lot of liquid fertilisers every day, and the reason for that is that the Amazon frogbit is such a fast grower. All the access to light, of course, really near the light, access to CO2 in the air, and all this huge root system is really pulling in the nutrients from the water column, and therefore they will starve quite quickly. You know, it's not a big fish load in there particularly. I am feeding 2 or 3 times a day, but just this NT Labs micro crumb at the moment, which they absolutely love, all of the fish. But yeah, no substrate fertilisation, which is interesting because the Halantium is quite a big root feeder, and that goes pale very quickly, which indicates low nutrients. So I'm actually adding 5 millilitres a day of Tropica specialised nutrition, which might seem quite a lot. It is quite a lot. But you can see the results are doing really well. What I really like is the contrast in the styles here. You know, the aquariums themselves are absolutely identical and the filtration systems are identical. But this one on the right is definitely what I would regard as high tech. We're injecting inline CO2 quite a lot, about 3 bubbles a second, using quite a lot of lighting here. This is the Life Aqua Prime Pro 600EX. I have been offered a new light from Skylight, I think it's called. Curious to try that out. I think Dave from Aquarium Garden stocks those as well. The plants are just growing beautifully. The Ludwigia here is exactly the same species as the Ludwigia on the left there, and you can probably see the colour difference just in this shot here. I'll get some close-ups, of course. Deliberately planted really heavily with a load of almost chaotic species just because I was experiencing so much algae. But it's a real joy to see all the textures combining into like this jungle chaotic mess, kind of like a Tice Streetman style aqua chaos aquascape, which I really enjoy. Lots of algae on the rocks, no surprise there. Don't really have any great algae eaters for that, so that has to be cleaned manually, which I use. This is my favourite tool at the moment. My new favourite maintenance tool is the ADA brush. I don't know what they call it, the proper name, but it's a very stiff steel wire brush, which is really great for removing tough algae. I use some on this rock, in the rocks in here in fact, and I'll get some close-ups of that because before now I've never ever cleaned these rocks properly, so it's really interesting to see them exposed. If you fancy treating yourself to a relatively expensive brush, then I highly recommend the ADA brush. I really love this kind of chaotic look, and what I can do is just manually kind of just remove the leaves here and there to kind of reiterate the layout, to evolve it how I wish. You know, I've moved the red plants around a little bit. There's Amazon sword in the back, that's Echinodorus major, I believe, which won't get much bigger than that at all. So it's a really interesting backdrop, different to kind of the regular Iwagumi style aquascapes that we see. There is actually 3 stones in there. We call that sands on Iwagumi. The shrimp are breeding in there. I've just spotted a baby shrimp. There's a couple of platies in here, put the others in the therapy tank. That's another video coming soon. Created an aquascape for my therapist's waiting room in exchange for free therapy. And nothing to be ashamed of if you need therapy. In fact, I will be doing a special dedicated video on how we can use aquascaping potentially as a source of therapy and linking that into a professional service as well. So that'll be interesting for some of you, I'm sure. Other plants we got in here is one from Denelay. This is Echinodorus, no, it's Helanthrium tenellum red. So it's different to the green, so a thinner leaf blade and the edges of the leaf turn a beautiful red colour. We've got tenellum green, which is very similar leaf shape, slightly broader leaf, but a fresh light green colour. Then we've got the Helanthrium quadricostatus again here, which as you can see is carpeting here. So that will need keeping in check. Pygrophila polysperma, more Ludwigia, Eleocaulon Vietnam. Actually got some Ludwigia palustris red in the back here, which hasn't come up yet. I think I've got some Sagittaria subulata as well. That's staying quite short, which is interesting, I think because of the intense lighting. Eleocharis persilla, formerly known as Eleocharis acicularis mini, all plants from Tropica, apart from the Helanthrium tenellum red and the Echinodorus major. The rock is mini landscape rock or Siriu stone from Aquarium Gardens. Beautiful. For those that have been a regular viewer to my channel, they will remember this scape maybe from a few weeks ago, absolutely full of different types of algae, and now it's almost immaculate, and I'm so grateful, I'm so thankful for that. You know, I was very tempted to strip it all down and start again. And but just with a bit of patience, a bit of TLC, tender loving care, I brought it back, or nature brought it back with my input to what you see here. So it does need a good trim. That's another video in itself, how to tame a jungle. Very different style of aquascape, isn't it? It's almost like a jungle style crossed with Iwagumi. I think Ty's going to be impressed with it. Other differences in technology, we talked about the light, the filtration and the CO2. The filtration is exactly the same. I only ever use the supplied media with the Iwase filters. A lot of people swap it out for Seachem Matrix, but I don't. I just use the supplied media, the supplied pre-filter sponges. Everything works a treat. There have been some recent upgrades to the Biomaster, which we'll probably talk about in another video or on the Iwase channels at some point. So that'll be interesting. The substrate system, that's very different. This is, I think it's a Iwase Scaper soil, but with a base layer of the ADA Power Sand Advanced with a host of bacteria and other additives to improve and optimize the entire substrate system. So both tanks, you know, side by side, they're very different, of course. Plant growth is, you know, a lot more vibrant in here, a lot quicker. CO2 injection, it's an unnecessary bonus. It's necessary if you want to grow some species of plant, but not necessary in order to achieve a healthy planted aquarium. Some people can't afford it, some people are scared of CO2 injection. You know, it is a high pressure CO2 cylinder, about 800 to 1000 psi. And it's understandable that some people are reluctant to invest, especially, you know, given the cost and their perceived kind of, you know, safety issues. But, you know, rest assured, I've been injecting CO2 now for 20 years plus. Never experienced any injuries. Had a few leaking cylinders here and there, but no major dramas. Got some Otocinclus in here as well. I am aware that this video is going all over the place. I did literally just start the camera rolling just to see if it worked, and I just carried on talking. What else can I tell you? The lights are on for the same amount of time each, on for 8 hours a day on a timer. What I've done is I've plugged in both filters and heaters into the same 4-way extension, and then when I come to maintaining the tanks, which I do together, I just switch it off with one switch, which is really handy. And I do water changes at the same time, and this is another kind of contradiction maybe. A lot of people don't like to do big water changes in low-tech tanks, but it's something that I believe in. I believe it can keep the system fresh, and it gives you more chance of healthy plant growth and less algae, especially if you want good results in the shorter term. And it will go back to my original point that beginners don't want to potentially go through those months of startup issues, you know, algae blooms, plants melting, etc. We can bypass those generally with decent water changes and liquid fertilisers and good lighting. So that's my kind of take on the low tech, and I'm achieving great results with that. This said, the Tropical AquaCube, which is my other low tech system, has very few water changes, and I just top up that with rainwater. But I've only been able to do that, I mean, it took a good 4 months or so to kind of stabilise. And again, you know, how many beginner hobbyists would be willing to go through that for 4 months of you know, constant algae and so on. So it's important to give people good advice that's suitable for the livestock they're keeping, but also suitable for themselves, you know, and their lifestyle. And we want to make the hobby as easy as possible for people, or we want to reduce the barrier for entry for success. Because if we don't, then we lose hobbyists, and again, that's really sad. I genuinely would love to see an aquarium, you know, almost everywhere, in every living space, every office, every school, because I really believe they can connect people with nature in a different way to, say, a house plant or a terrarium. There's something, for me anyway, something really special about seeing all these plants and fish and shrimp underwater. It's like we've got almost like a little slice of underwater nature in our zone, which I really love. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story about kind of ego, really. It's an interesting one. So I started getting noticed really in the aquarium hobby online in around 2003. What's that, 21 years ago? I became very active on a forum. I think it was called fishforums.net back in the day. And I became a moderator. I think I was only on there for 6 months or so, and they made me a moderator, which inflated my ego. I felt really important, and this sense of, you know, I don't know, it just felt good. It felt, I felt recognised. I felt validated, I guess, because the admin, obviously, for whatever reason, thought I was talking sense and I could communicate effectively, or whatever. So that was the first taste of ego-based thinking, and I loved it. And I became very prolific on there, giving advice where I could, showing off my tanks where I could, and it was showing off. There's no two ways about it, and I still do that now. And you know, I'm not ashamed to admit I love showing off, but I love showing off for a different reason, I guess, now. Anyway, I'm digressing. Yeah, 2003, became a moderator on fishforums.net, quite prolific, almost got addicted to it. I was even going on there in work time. I used to work in an explosive storage area in the Royal Air Force. And one of the duties was to sit in, it's like the security sentry post, to guard the entrance, to stop basically people that shouldn't be there coming in, where we were storing all these explosives and ammunition, etc. And you go for hours and hours without seeing anyone. And so what I would do is I'll go on the PC, on the work PC, and you could get on the internet, and I would just absolutely do so much reading, learning about the aquarium hobby, contributing thousands of posts on this forum. And then fast forward to 2004-5, I was subscribing to Practical Fish Keeping magazine. I was reading some of the articles by their current planted aquarium experts, and what they were writing about was contradicting what I was learning about from people like Tom Barr. So Tom Barr, planted aquarium expert, bit of a legend in the hobby and in the industry, he advocated this estimative index method of fertilisation, which basically, for those that don't know, is deliberately overdosing your aquarium, your planted aquarium, with all of the nutrients that they need in excess every day, and then once a week diluting them with a 50% water change. And then what that would do, it would mean that you didn't need to test your water for the nutrients, because you know you'd be getting absolutely enough, because you'd be deliberately overdosing. And there's a table or some calculations that you can go online and figure out what you need to dose, etc. And the reason for the water changes is to reset the nutrient levels, but also to dilute the waste organics which the plants actually produce, as well as the fish, shrimp, snails and bacteria. And that's what I started doing, you know, with CO2 injection, healthy plant growth and lots of it, loads of liquid liquid fertilisers. I'd actually make my own up with dry chemicals back in the day. I'm not sure if you can even get these chemicals now online, because you can actually use them to make explosives, ironically. So I'd have great results with this estimative index, otherwise known as EI. And I think I was one of the first in the UK to really advocate for this and promote it. And I got noticed by the staff at Practical Fish Keeping magazine. And then I was reading these old school kind of methodology ways of doing planted aquariums, which would swear that nitrates and phosphates were really bad for the planted aquarium and they'd cause algae. But it's actually the opposite. You know, nitrogen and phosphorus are actually macronutrients that are required by plants for growth, healthy growth, especially in a high energy system with lots of light, CO2 injection, where the background levels of nitrogen and phosphorus produced by the fish and other waste processes, that isn't enough to feed the plants. So we actually deliberately have to dose these chemicals. So I wrote in to Practical Fish Keeping and I said, I don't want to disagree with you guys, but you know, nitrates and phosphates aren't bad. Here's my tank. I sent them in, literally sent them in a physical photograph of my tank with a printed out letter. It was quite old school back then. And I'm dosing nitrates and phosphates in here and look at the results. I've got a full carpet of glossostigma, you know, all the plants are super healthy. No algae, you know, what do you think? And they were like really impressed. They actually wanted to do a home visit, do a reader visit, which I was super proud of. Again, a bit of an ego pump there. Unfortunately, I was off to the Falkland Islands shortly after I sent this letter, and part of my job in the Air Force. So I said, oh, sorry, I can't come because I'm off to the Falklands soon. I've actually shut my aquarium down. However, if you're interested, I'd like to write a series of articles about this new way of keeping planted aquariums. And I can't remember if I labelled it this way or they labelled it this way, but we called it the high-tech planted tank method. And that stuck with me, that label, you know, and I literally got given a name badge. Fast forward after the Falkland Islands, I did a reader visit. Eventually, I think they did a nano tank, which was really lovely, which CO2 injection and EI again. See if I can dig that. I think there's a video. I think it's my first ever video on YouTube, like in 240 pixels or something. I'll put a overlay. So they came and filmed that. I had a good chat. They invited me to the Festival of Fish Keeping, which was a consumer hobbyist event down in Hayling Island on the south coast of the UK. And I was part of their panel of experts. Again, it's a big ego boost here. It's funny thinking back how I felt. I really felt so great, you know. They gave me a name badge and it had the official, like, Practical Fish Keeping high-tech planted tank expert. And I looked at this badge and I was like, I have made it as a hobbyist. You know, I am an expert, you know, accredited by this well-known magazine. This is 2006 now. And I was so proud of myself for achieving quite a lot in such a relatively short time. And this is before the age of social media. We just had the forums. We didn't have Facebook. Maybe just Facebook started? No, I can't even remember when Facebook started. Anyway, I wasn't on Facebook then. And fast forward to 2007, I co-founded the UK Aquatic Plant Society, and this was with some influence by Tom Barr, who let us host our sub-forum, the UK Aquatic Plant Society, on the Barr Report, which is still running now. And both UK Aquatic Plant Society and the Barr Report do still run. So we were hosted on there temporarily, and then we had our own site, and which is still running now, UCAPS, as we call it for short, UK APS. It's a bit of bubbling from the filter there. It's purling like crazy, this tank right now. Amazing. Get some footage of this. It's looking stunning. Spent all day maintaining it yesterday, just chilling out, put some headphones in. Yeah, I love it. Digressing. So yeah, UCAPS, and then I was like the high-tech guy on there, and there's a lot of high-tech aquascaping on there, and never really looked at low-tech. Didn't really look down on it, just wasn't interested in it. I was just really interested in growing, you know, healthy for plants quite quickly, algae-free. And I did dabble with low-tech here and there over the years, done a few setups which have been successful. There's a few on my channel. I really strongly identified myself, I labelled myself as high-tech. Definitely an ego thing. I guess a lot of folk, when they identify as something, it becomes almost tribal. It feels unsafe to relinquish any attachment to that label. I was in that zone, if I'm honest, and I would just stick with the high-tech, stick with what you know. What changed the game for me was when I set up the 2 little nanocubes, and I'll leave a link to that video as well, which were low-tech, no water change, went through all the iterations of algae and plants melting and just kept with it. And they were successful, and the AquaCube is proof of that now. I think it's 7 months old, doing really well. Always tinkering around with it though. Perhaps I should just leave it a bit more, but the stem plant growth in the back I think is just keeping it all kind of stable, because the Anubias is obviously very slow growing. And now I don't see myself as a low-tech or a high-tech, you know, I just see myself as an aquascaper who's passionate about creating beautiful aquariums, but passionate about caring for what's in those aquariums, rather than just using them as an aesthetic kind of consumerist based perspective, if you like. You know, we're actually creating underwater worlds, you know, microcosms and ecosystems of living entities. You know, I don't know if fish and snails and shrimp and bacteria are necessarily conscious or can feel pain. I think fish can feel pain. I think there's evidence of that now. But, you know, we have a responsibility to give them the best we can. And started to even consider, you know, is high-tech, you know, is injecting CO2 actually ethical? I chatted with this about Ty last time I saw him. You know, he was saying actually there's lots of CO2 in some river systems, so I was kind of like, oh, so that's a relief. But yeah, it's just really interesting, and the more I kind of spend time with the hobby and thinking about these things, the more interesting it gets. And it's like anything, any topic, any hobby, any subject, any genre in life, the more you look into it, the more you realise you don't know. And I guess, I can't remember who said it, but the real wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. and there's a joy in that, there's a freedom in that, because as soon as you think you know it all, then where's the joy? You know, what's the purpose of that? You know, I just want to remain curious, open to learning, open-minded, evolve my hobby, evolve my creativity, evolve my YouTube content appropriately. Some of you may not enjoy it so much, some of you may love it. I think the main thing is that I enjoy creating it and it's serving some value to some of you. That's kind of job done. What else can we talk about? I didn't script this, I didn't even come up with a plan. I just thought I need to do a high-tech versus low-tech video, and I've just been rambling literally for the last half an hour or so, but hopefully some of it's made sense. Please hit the like button if you have enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Lots more great content to come. Excited to show you the therapy tank in particular. We're going to be moving that fairly soon into the therapist's office, so you can keep an eye on the As a UK YouTube channel for that. And yeah, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. It does feel weird sat here, literally the house is empty and I'm just talking to a camera, which is what YouTubers do. I think that's enough. Yeah. Take care. See you in the next one. Cheerio.